Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Let's start with what just happened. A sitting U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was abruptly removed from her position. No long transition, no carefully staged exit. Just a clear signal from the White House, it's over. And almost immediately, the explanations started pouring in. Some people said she was ineffective. Others claimed she failed to deliver on key investigations. Some went further, arguing she didn't go after the right people or that she mishandled politically sensitive cases like those connected to Epstein. If you scroll through social media or listen to partisan commentary, the conclusion sounds simple. She failed, and she got fired. But here's the problem. That's not actually how Washington works. If you really want to understand why someone in that position gets removed, you have to step back from the noise and look at the system itself, how power, law, and politics actually interact in the United States. Because the role of Attorney General is one of the most misunderstood jobs in American government. On paper, it sounds straightforward. The Attorney General runs the Department of Justice. The United States Department of Justice oversees federal prosecutions, works with agencies like the FBI, and enforces federal law. But in reality, it's a balancing act that almost no one gets right for long, because the Attorney General has two masters. On one side, there's the President. The Attorney General is a political appointee. They're chosen by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and expected, at least in broad terms, to carry out the administration's priorities. On the other side, there's the law itself. The Department of Justice is supposed to operate independently. Prosecutors are not supposed to act based on political pressure. Investigations are supposed to be based on evidence, not loyalty. And that tension between political loyalty and legal independence is where most attorney generals run into trouble. So when someone like Donald Trump decides to remove an attorney general, it's almost never about just one thing. It's usually a combination of three deeper factors. The first is trust. This is the most important one, and it's also the least visible to the public. A president doesn't need to agree with their attorney general on every detail. But they do need to feel that, when it matters, that person is aligned with them strategically, politically, and instinctively. The moment that trust starts to slip, whether because of disagreements, perceived hesitation, or just a sense that things aren't moving the way they should, that relationship becomes unstable. And once trust is gone, it's very hard to recover. The second factor is execution. In politics, results matter, not intentions, not explanations, results. From the White House perspective, the question is simple. Are things getting done? Are key investigations moving forward? Are legal strategies holding up in court? Is the department operating effectively or constantly reacting? Now, here's where a lot of outside commentary gets it wrong. People often assume that no visible action means failure. But in the legal world, that's not necessarily true. Some investigations take years, some cases never become public, and sometimes the decision not to prosecute is itself the result of legal constraints. Still, politics doesn't always wait for legal nuance. If the perception inside the administration is that the department isn't delivering, that perception can become reality very quickly. And then there's the third factor, alignment of timing and priorities. This one is subtle but critical. Every administration has a sense of timing, when to escalate an issue, when to de-escalate, when to focus public attention, and when to move something quietly behind the scenes. If the Department of Justice moves out of sync with that, if it amplifies something the White House wants to contain, or slows down something the White House wants to highlight, that creates friction. Not necessarily because anyone is wrong, but because they're operating on different timelines. And in a political environment, timing is everything. Now, if you go back and look at the public criticisms of Bondi through that lens, something interesting happens. Instead of seeing a simple story about competence or incompetence, you start to see a more complex picture. Concerns about lack of action start to look like concerns about execution and visibility. Criticism about handling sensitive cases starts to look like possible misalignment in strategy or timing, and frustration about not pursuing certain individuals. That brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions in all of this: the idea that the Department of Justice should be used as a political weapon. You hear this argument a lot. Why didn't she go after certain figures? Why weren't more people charged? Why wasn't there a more aggressive response? But the reality is, in the American system, that's not how it's supposed to work. Even controversial figures, like James Comey or others, who've been at the center of political debates, cannot be prosecuted simply because they're politically inconvenient. There has to be evidence. There has to be a legal basis. And even then, prosecutors have to believe the case can stand up in court. That doesn't mean the system always works perfectly. It doesn't mean politics never influences decisions, but it does mean that there are structural limits on what any attorney general can actually do. And that's where the job becomes almost impossible. Because from the outside, people expect action, they expect accountability, they expect visible results. From the inside, the constraints are real, legal, institutional, and procedural. And the attorney general is stuck in the middle. This isn't new, by the way. If you look back at recent history, this pattern repeats itself. Jeff Sessions lost favor after recusing himself from a politically sensitive investigation, creating a sense, fair or not, that he wasn't fully aligned with the president. Alberto Gonzales faced mounting political pressure and eventually resigned amid controversy and congressional scrutiny. Different presidents, different parties, different circumstances, but the same underlying tension. So when you hear a simple explanation, she was bad at her job, or she didn't do enough, or she didn't go after the right people, it's worth asking a deeper question. Compared to what? Compared to the expectations of the public, the demands of politics, or the actual constraints of the legal system? Because those three things don't always line up, and they rarely ever do. So what likely happened here isn't a single failure or a single decision. It's a convergence, a gradual shift in trust, a perception, fair or not, that execution wasn't meeting expectations, and possibly a growing mismatch between how the department was operating and how the White House wanted it to operate. At a certain point, those things reach a tipping point. And when they do, the decision becomes inevitable. Not because one moment changed everything, but because too many small things added up. And that's the part that most headlines miss. This isn't just about Pam Bondi. It's about the structure of power in the United States. It's about what happens when law and politics intersect, and sometimes collide. And it's about a job that sits right at the center of that collision, where every decision is scrutinized, every delay is questioned, and every outcome is politicized. So the next time you see a headline about someone being fired, or forced out, or stepping down, especially in a role like this, remember, the real story is almost never the loudest one. It's the one beneath it. The one shaped by trust, pressure, timing, and the quiet realities of how the system actually works. Thanks for watching.